So a child credit tax plan that Senator Mitt Romney has been working on, also sponsored by Senator Richard Burr and Senator Steve Daines, has been getting more traction this week. He's been working on various child tax credit proposals over the course of this year. He introduced one back in January and February that we covered. It was initially criticized by Senators Marco Rubio and Mike Lee, who said basically there's nothing conservative about creating a new entitlement, which is essentially what it would have done. And this new bill actually does the same thing. It's, according to Romney, budget neutral. It applies, it has a work requirement that was intended to sort of get Marco Rubio and Mike Lee sort of to satisfy them, although I don't know that it has. They have their own plan that I imagine they'll be sticking with. So under this proposed plan, the families get $350 a month for each child 5 years old and younger. So that's about $4,200 a year. Then $250 per month per children that are between the ages of 6 and 17, totaling about $3,000 a year. Then the benefits are limited up to 6 kids, and you need to earn $10,000 in the previous year to qualify for full benefits. It continues to be referred to as a tax credit. The same thing is true of the earlier Romney plan, but essentially what it is cash payments. And I think it's worth us talking about here, particularly because it's worth sort of understanding where both the right and the left are on these difficult questions. The Biden cash plan was popular. It was phased out. It doesn't exist anymore. It did cut child poverty. There are estimates that this would cut child poverty. This didn't satisfy the left. They didn't like the $10,000 work requirement that was intended to, maybe be persuasive to people like Marco Rubio and Mike Lee. So all that is to say, Ryan, what do you make of the sort of Republican tug of war over tax credits or cash payments, basically, for kids?
Well, the reason that the Biden one cut child poverty is because it didn't have that work requirement and it was refundable. In other words, the people who are in poverty, and particularly in deep poverty, saw a significant benefit from it, and by getting those monthly cash payments that pulled them out of poverty. Like that, it's when it comes to poverty, it's a pretty simple calculation because we define poverty by a certain threshold of income, and if you manage to provide income to people above that threshold, you get them out of poverty. Like that's how the Biden plan was able to reduce poverty. It was initially estimated to reduce it by 50%. I think it ended up reducing it by 30% or so, but within that first year. But if you don't do those two things, if you don't take care of the people that are in the most poverty with this program, then it's not going to reduce poverty. And so I'm curious how serious you think Republicans are about negotiating with Democrats on this question, and whether or not that's something that they'll give on, because right now, under their current plan, some people would be better off, and it's nice to see them talking about refund, the monthly child tax payments, but something like 7 million poor people would be actually worse off under this plan, which is not something. Why? The world's awful enough as it is. Why are we trying to make it worse for 7 million poor people?
So, I obviously come to that with a completely different framework, which is that over time, the entitlement system does erode communities and it erodes the work ethic. I know you completely disagree with that, but that is my answer to the question, which is that ultimately developing reliance on the federal government is not a healthy thing for either people or communities. And so some work requirement, I don't think it should be astronomical, and $10,000 really isn't. Although I've heard complaints that, there are grandparents involved sometimes who are getting tax credits, et cetera, and I'm all for sort of fixes on questions like that. But I do share the concerns of Senators Rubio and Lee that work is essential in situations like this because it's not healthy. It hasn't been historically healthy in different communities with different programs. If you look at it, we probably disagree on the data there, but that's sort of my perspective. And one thing that always frustrates me, I'm not from a red state. I'm from a purple-ish state. But like there are voices of working class people that I think the left doesn't always give enough attention to. And Orrin Cass's group, American Compass, put together a really interesting sort of like booklet of just essays from normal working class people around the country. And one thing you hear in there, and you hear in general, is that not every working class person wants money from the government or thinks that that is the best way to approach child poverty. So while there's data showing that it eats away at child poverty in the short term, what happens in the long term is a really different question. And that's absolutely my concern. So that's kind of where I don't think that this is a great plan. I don't think it's super smart. But to your question about are Republicans serious? I mean, Marco Rubio and Mitt Romney are both people that will jump on bills with Democrats. And Marco Rubio's been working with, I think, Kirsten Gillibrand on a veterans bill. Romney has plenty of good relationships with Democrats. I could see something like really slimmed down coming together, but it would probably be on the Romney side, not on the Rubio side, would be my guess.
No, and I think it's true that like most people in general, don't want government handouts. Like people want to feel like they're doing this on their own. One of the beauties of this child tax credit is that in many ways it is their own money, just a child tax credit getting refunded to them earlier. For the poorest of the poor, they would rather not be in that situation. But when they find themselves in that situation, they'd rather have the refundable tax credit than not have the refundable tax credit. And I think when we start putting these work requirements in, we're making policy for healthy, able-bodied people, and people will try to find somebody who is because they're getting this payment now they're not going out and looking for a job anymore. But in a country of 330 million people, you're gonna have several million people who are just incapable of getting by in this society. And that's not going to be necessarily for their entire lives, but for long stretches of their lives, they just, and even no matter what you do with the work requirements, because with TANF, which started in Wisconsin as a kind of little project there and then went national, they really whittled it down to, okay, please show up at this government trailer for 20 hours a week and punch some keys on something. And they were creating these make work programs for people in the end. But a lot of people who are going through mental crises or mentally ill or have substance abuse issues, there's not something that they can do. So then the question is, what about them? What is the plan there?
Yeah, and our government has not been historically good at administering these benefits in a way that is healthy for people, that is actually short term. And the bigger question, of course, actually one of my big problems with this is I think it's a subsidy for corporations essentially to stop having to worry about providing childcare and providing adequate incomes for people to be able to cover the insane costs of childcare. And I think probably that's part of what Republican senators hear and then get interested in. I don't think that's true of Rubio, who actually worked with Democrats to get the refundable and doubled child tax credit into that Trump tax bill. But I do think, Republican interest in this, I wonder how much of it is actually coming from an interest in corporations, because I do really see this as, and maybe they think it'll raise their taxes over time. They're probably already aware that that's going to happen, but it takes the burden off of their shoulders. And that gets back to a more systemic question that you and I absolutely agree on, which is that our government prefers to do Band-Aids that they can campaign on instead of actually improving the system to the point where people feel like they have dignity and agency and can provide what Blake Masters talked about in our interview with him. You should be able to have a stable middle-class job with one parent, and one parent can stay home and raise their family if they want to. One parent is in the workforce. You should be able to. There was a time in this country when you could, and you can't anymore because our government continues to just pad the system with Band-Aids that are ultimately good for corporations but not for workers or families.
Right, and the problem is that once you see any wage increases taking hold across the economy, the Federal Reserve comes in and smashes it to pieces and tries to create a recession to drive those wages back down. So if we're not going to allow wages to rise, and we want people's incomes to go up, then we got to figure something else out.
Yeah, talk to me about that, Senator from Bain Capital, and talk to me about the system itself before asking us to all, I think automate cash payments to families on a monthly basis. And Ryan, you're right. That's not what most people want anyway. So this is it's a story that I think we'll continue to follow. We follow it on the left, we follow it on the right, but it's really interesting. Just as something that families are particularly in need of, childcare and extra help, extra money, whether it comes from the government or somewhere else is a different question. But we know it's important, and we'll stay on the story, and we'll have more Rising for you right after this.